Hello, I'm Technomancer, creator Crossroads, and this is my tutorial on how to automate Alchemy. I'm going to suggest that you watch the previous video before this one, which covers the basics of all the Alchemy mechanics, and also how to do all the Alchemy crafting manually. This is in order to understand what I'm working with today with the automated Alchemy stuff. We're not going to talk about so much the uses and applications of these things until the next video, which you can skip ahead to if you like, where we're going to show off all the actual items and machines in Alchemy that are really more helpful and the reason we're doing all this. So in this video, it's all going to be kind of abstract because, well, we're going to talk about, oh, and this is how you would do a mass production of Quicksilver, except what's Quicksilver for? Yeah. So there's several basic components to the automation stuff. All of them are in front of me, I think. I know this might look intimidating, but it's actually not too bad. We're going to start with the temperature regulator, which I've immediately realized was not actually in front of me, which is a very, very, very useful machine, which has two variants, the normal one and the redstone one. If you understand one, you understand them both. And again, I'm going to be using this cheat block, which we're not going to really explain, which is my infinite cheat heat and cold source. Again, there's a video on Easter eggs that's going to explain that in more detail. So let's get that heating up. The temperature regulator lets us very, very, very precisely and easily control the temperature on the output side. Now, this would make doing things like automating the fat congealer, where you needed to keep a temperature range, really, really trivial, because this machine is so convenient. You don't need to mess around with measuring stuff with comparators and redstone heat cables and stuff. It just does it. You're going to want quite a few of these. And it's got two modes, the blue and the red mode, and I'm going to show the red mode first. So first of all, I'm going to place it down, and that is the wrong way around. Okay, very good. Very good start. The front of this thing is the side that this little arrow points to. You see the little copper arrow? On the side with the copper band with its little arrow, that points towards the front. And the back is obviously the other side. So let's say I want to keep this heat cable, let's just say above 100 degrees C. Well, we've got an input here that's much, much hotter than 100 degrees C. But we don't want it to go too much above 100 degrees C. We really want to keep it as close as possible to 100 degrees C. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in this UI and we're going to say 100 degrees. And oh, that's worked. It says 99.9, but it rounds to 100. It's because heat loss is happening as well, because these cables have their own heat loss. Oop, that's a wrench. So what's going on here? Well, in red mode, like this, the thermal regulator will take heat from the back to the front until it reaches the target temperature. So it had a much hotter heat source on the back, and the thing was heating up on the front. Now, if I get out a cheat device, this is just going to let me cheat around with temperatures. If I forcibly heat this above 100, it's not going to cool it down to 100. That number dropping is just normal temperature loss. So this is a one-directional heat transfer machine. It only goes forwards. If we were trying to keep this cooled, like let's say we wanted to cool it to negative 20 degrees C. Or let's even say negative 25. Sure, we want to keep something cooled to negative 25 degrees C. So we're going to get a cold source, as you'd expect we'd need, and this time we're going to use it in blue mode. So for red mode, we're keeping things heated above a temperature. In blue mode, we shift right click with a wrench to toggle it. We're going to keep things cooled below a temperature. And I'm going to say negative 20 degrees C. And it's just cooled it down to negative 20 degrees C using the cold source on the back. So this way, it's again one-way heat transfer. Heat gets pulled from the front to the back until it's cooled down below this target temperature. Now, there's limits to this. I can't just use a room temperature heat cable and expect it to magically cool it down. That's not a thing. You do actually need a cold source. I can't just say, oh, that's didn't mean to rent. Let me just replace it. Let's just say, you can't just say, oh, just cool it magically to negative 30 degrees C. That's not going to work because it can't actually cool it down any further. I know the temperature looks a bit cold here. We're actually in a snow biome due to things I was tampering with earlier. So it's quite cold in the ambient temperature, and over here, let me move away from the... I was messing around with biome stuff earlier. Don't worry about that. So it was actually in a snow biome, even though it looked like a desert. So it can't just magically cool things down. It needs a cold source on the back in order to cool things down. See? Now, again, if I were to forcibly heat that up, or sorry, if I were to cool that down further below negative 20°C, it's not going to heat it back to negative 20°C. It's a one-way thing. So what if I wanted to keep something in a specific temperature range, no matter what happens? Like, let's say I want to keep a heat cable, this heat cable. Let's say I want to keep it between 40 and 80 degrees C. And as long as it's in that range, I'm happy. 40 and 80. Well, in this one, we're going to say keep it below 80, blue mode to keep it cold. And in this one, we're going to say keep it above 40, red mode to keep it hot. And we've got a cold source on the back, sorry, a heat source on the back for where we're heating, and a cold source on the front where we're cooling. And this is now going to be kept in our temperature range. And if I heat it up, if I heat it above 80, it's going to cool down using the, oops, wrong way around, sorry. There we go. If I heated it above 80, like I just did, I like to break and replace these a lot just to make absolutely sure that it's like that we've got a nice reset setup. You can see if I heat this up above 80, it's going to quickly cool it back down to 80, and then it's just normal heat loss until it reaches below 40 degrees, where it's going to quickly get heated up again. I can't cool this below 40 because it's reheating itself. So now I've used two of these to force a temperature range. Now, because there's rounding and stuff, I might want to make this a little tighter, like say 50 to 70, so I can be absolutely certain we're staying in that temperature range and we don't worry about getting outside it. But these, I just spent 10 minutes on these because they're so useful and I use them a lot. The redstone one is basically the same, except instead of setting a temperature in the UI, you use those circuits from Essentials, and its temperature is set to the circuit input. So in here is where I'd put my 40 or 80. Okay. But we're just going to be using the regular basic ones. Okay, I mentioned those because we're going to do temperature manipulation a lot. Temperatures are going to be important with how we automate moving chemicals around. So the first thing is, now that we're ready to work with chemicals in an automated way, we're not going to use any of the glassware we showed off in the previous video. We're not going to use the electrolyzer, the glassware stand, files, or flasks. None of it. Because none of this stuff can actually interact with automation. Like, I can't even use hoppers on this. If I take a hopper... and we've got an empty bottle here, if I try and put, let's say, redstone dust in with a hopper, it just doesn't work. Can't automate these. They're manual only. Can't really automate them very well. There's a little bit you can do. Well, okay. So instead of using those Florence flasks, we're going to use these things called reaction vessels. Now, all of these things come in glass and crystal variants. I'm just going to be using the crystal ones. The glass ones are exactly the same, except they're made of glass instead of alchemical crystal, making them a bit cheaper. And they'll break if you put like higher tier chemicals in them. But we're going to use the crystal ones. So the reaction vessel is basically our Florence flask. It's much bigger, it can store a lot more. You can connect a heat cable to any side of it, just like you could connect a heat cable to the bottom of a Florence flask. we can, let me just disconnect this, also interact with it with hoppers. So if I want to put some redstone dust in, I can just hopper that in. And it's hot in there, so it's immediately reacting into sulfur dioxide and quicksilver. Similarly, if there were a solid in there, this one, everything's a gas. Let me get one that's colder. Let me just have a separate one over here, just cold. If there were a solid in there, we can hopper out of it. But it can only hopper things out when they're a solid. If they're a liquid or gas, they won't come out. And we can interact with it with our files and flasks like we did before. Like it was any other glassware. We can take stuff out, we can put stuff in. But that's manual, and we're not so interested in manual. We're interested in mass producing certain chemicals and certain reagents. The other thing is we've got storage vessels. So these were the reaction vessels. This is the storage vessel. Storage vessel is basically a tank. It's like a file in that reactions won't happen in it. No matter the temperature, no matter what you mix, things won't react while they're in the tank, in the storage vessel. It's got a huge capacity of 1,000, which is quite a lot. And circuits and comparators can measure how full it is. So again and again, you can interact with it with like files and flasks by right-clicking and right-click items in and out. And hoppers can put items in and out. But you can't connect, for example, a heat cable to it. Now, there's these conduits which move reagents around. So they're like pipes. And let's just do a line of them. And if I get my wrench, you can treat them basically like pipes. And if I put something in here, let's say some redstone dust, it's going to get moved along to the other side. Nothing too fancy there. Where it does get a little fancy is that unlike pipes, moving up and down isn't quite so straightforward. Not all chemicals can go up, and not all chemicals can go down. So for example, if I put some redstone dust in here, we should if these were liquid pipes, which they aren't, we'd expect it to come along, reach the junction, and half would go up and half would go down. That's not going to happen. They're all going to go down. Okay, well if I break the tank, will they go up yet? No. In fact, they get stuck in the pipe. What's going on here is solids obey gravity. Solids cannot go up. They can only go sideways or down. See, they're happy to go down. It won't go up. Liquids also obey gravity. If I get some liquid in here, like say some distilled water, aka water, won't go up, and it will go down. Gases, and for this one, I'm just going to spawn it in gas form. This should be gaseous. Yeah. Gases will go up, but they won't go down. So, liquids and solids only go sideways and down. Gases only go sideways and up. This might seem like a nuisance, but it's actually a good thing. First of all, it's not really a nuisance because there's this thing called a pump. These pumps do not take any type of power, they just work. And it lets you force things to go in a certain direction. So I can say, have a pump here, set it to down, and now if I put in a gas, it will go down just fine. Or if I wanted to force things to go up, I could have a bunch of these, wrench them so that they're up like this, so like that. And anything that goes in it will just go up. So you can force things to go any direction you like. So actually, the fact that gases won't go down and liquids and solids won't go up is actually a useful thing, even though it's kind of strange to consider that useful. So the reason that's useful is it lets you separate things. So when we had a mixture of things and we were doing it the manual way, let's say we had a bunch of stuff mixed together, like when we made alchemical salt, we'd end up with a mix of alchemical salt and chlorine. If we wanted to separate those, the only way pretty much was to freeze it, and then we'd be able to take them out in item form. See, chlorine and then the salt separately. Now, we don't really want to do that automatically. We don't want to have to, in our automated setup, we don't really want to have to put things in bottles and then freeze them and take them out in item form, and then sort them and then put them back in. We want to be able to automatically separate things. So of course we're going to do that. And the way we're going to do that is that if we have a mixture, probably some of them are going to be solids and liquids, and some of them are going to be gases. So we can split the gases from the solids and liquids by having a section in the pipe where it goes up and down like this. Now let's take this example. This is a cooling coil. Now in this particular version that I'm demonstrating on, there is a small bug. This will be fixed in the next version. This is a purely visual issue, but it will be fixed in the next version. The arrows on this are backwards. So even though it looks like this thing, the arrows are pointing to the right, it's actually should be pointing to the left, and now it should be pointing to the right, even though the arrows look left. This is a minor visual issue. It will be fixed in the next version. So even though the arrows look the wrong way around, pretend they're the right way around. Cooling coils will change the temperature of anything going through them. So anything that goes through a cooling coil will be instantly have its temperature changed to the ambient biome temperature of, in this case, 32.5 C, because we're in a pretty hot desert. So let's do this. So this is my little automated setup that was for making Quicksilver in item form. Now I'm going to disconnect part of it and just simplify this a bit. So let's see this. When we put redstone in, it gets heated up, and it turns into Quicksilver and sulfur dioxide. Both of these are gases, but we want to separate them, right? We ideally like them to be separate so that we don't fill up the same tank with both. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to cool it to biome temperature with our cooling coil, Conduit, and at biome temperature we know that sulfur dioxide is still a gas, because if you recall, if we look at sulfur dioxide's JEI thing, it tells us boiling point -10 C, air temperature here is higher than that. So it's still a gas, it's still going up. But Quicksilver is at this temperature, we know, a liquid. It's going to go down because the air temperature is below boiling here. So now we're going to have a mix of a liquid and a gas. So now by doing this, one path goes up, one path goes down, all the gas is going to go up. Oop, that was a wrench. I just changed the directions of a bunch of things. Keep doing that. All the gas goes up here, and all the liquid goes down here. So we've filtered out our Quicksilver and our sulfur dioxide. Nice and easy. Now, what if the temperatures aren't so nice? Like, what if we've got a mix of things and it's not the case that one of them's nicely a gas at biome temperature and the other one's not? Well, there's the thermal conduit, which is just like the cooling conduit, except it can take different temperatures. So instead of only going to biome temperatures, you connect a heat cable to this thing, and it will bring the temperature of whatever goes through it to the temperature of the heat cable. So in this case, it would heat things up to, well, it's still climbing, but 260 degrees C. So this is a good example of why you'd want that thermal regulator, right? Remember I said you're going to need to do temperature control a lot. This is one of those cases. Because let's say you had a mix of things where, to take an example of this that I just happen to know, oil of vitriol and azotic acid. Both of them are going to be liquid at air temperature. So to separate them, you can't put them to air temperature. You're going to need to heat it up to the point where one of them's a gas and the other one's not. So in that case, that would mean any temperature between 80 degrees C and 340 degrees C, because at that temperature, azotic acid would be a gas, because we'd be above boiling, and vitriol would still be a liquid, because we'd be below boiling. So we'd heat it to, let's say, 200 degrees C, that would work, and then do this sort of thing where one path goes up and the other goes down, and then we'll separate them, and then we can cool them or heat them and do whatever we wish. Now, in this little setup, I said that when I built this, I said, I want a setup where I put in redstone and I get out quicksilver in item form, and I don't care what happens to the sulfur dioxide. Okay, this is my quicksilver from redstone machine. Well, to get it in item form, it needs to hopper it out. It needs to be a solid, which means it needs to be colder, because this is just a liquid. So I used one of these thermal conduits, got it cold, and now it's a solid in here, and now the hopper can just pull it out as an item. And we've got frozen quicksilver in this chest. Now eventually, if I were to run this for long enough, and make enough quicksilver, eventually, it would take a while, because that tank's pretty big, eventually our sulfur dioxide tank would fill up. And that would be a problem, because then this pipe fills up, and then this pipe fills up, and then there's no more room for the quicksilver. So eventually we're going to overfill on sulfur dioxide. Well, I already said I don't really care what happens to the sulfur dioxide. Let's just dump it. So of course there is a redstone version of the conduits, just like with everything else, that only connects when it has a redstone signal, and we're just going to dump it, like that. And we could have a little system with like a circuit that measures how full the tank is, and if it's getting really close to full, we activate the conduit to dump it. And we dump it using the chemical vent. It basically just releases any chemicals you put into it. It just dumps them, it voids them. If they have an effect, it'll happen. Like some chemicals have an effect when released into the world, like chlorine gas hurts stuff. Salt will kill plants. All sorts of things like that. Some of them are beneficial, some of them are less so. So if there were any such effects, they would happen around the vent. Sulfur dioxide actually does have an effect. It's not a very exciting one. It actually cures hunger and also cures zombie villagers, so you don't need to do the whole vanilla thing of like a golden apple and stuff. And a weakness potion. That's just a thing. It's not super exciting, but our main goal here was to vent it because it was too much. So we would just vent it out the vent. If you had a chemical that was particularly dangerous, you wouldn't want to have your vent too close to where you're going to be, because that would be unfortunate. That would hurt, quite possibly. Now, there's a few other devices that, of course, I need to show off. For example, you'll recall that a lot of reactions needed to be electrically charged. So an example of that is azotic acid, or azotic salt. We needed boiling water in an electrical environment. Well, hoppers can't interact with the electrolyzer, it's no good for this. We can make one of these reaction vessels electrical. And all we need to do is just give it electricity. So if I do the exact same electricity source I did over here, I just wrench this around, and then put in a Leyden jar, it's going to slowly drain electricity, and we're going to see little lightning bolts in there that tell us it's charged. So if we needed to charge reactions, we can do that with the reaction vessel. We also have a couple other tools. For example, these things. These are fluid injectors, which let us pipe liquids in and out. Now, we could, for example, if we needed water in an automated way, we could just use ice, like packed ice is the item form, and hopper that in. Or we could use liquid distilled water, which is probably easier. Probably. So what you do is you get a fluid injector, and you just pipe liquid into the top of it. And the reagent form will come out the bottom. This one was set up the other way around. Let me just reconfigure this. Now remember, people often forget this, the liquid form of water, of the water reagent, is not vanilla water, it's distilled water. Chemistry labs don't use just random seawater when doing experiments. So if we put a bucket of water in there, we can see water comes out. This does work in reverse. We can flip this. Now, we need to get the water into this, and water's a liquid, so we're going to need a pump to get it to go up if we want to do this. And we can take the water out using this. I might have this backwards. I sometimes forget how this works. No, I'm just dumb. Apparently I'm just... Is that not a thing anymore? That might have been removed. My apologies, that is not a thing anymore. You cannot remove liquids using the fluid injector. It's an injector, not an outjector. That's not a thing. Yeah, I forgot. Sorry, my memory's not perfect. So yeah, this is a way to just pump in liquids. There's a couple other liquids that can go in this way. The other ones would be molten metals, like gold, can be used to get the metal equivalent of the reagent, and that's pretty much it. Not a lot of vanilla liquids that have reagent forms. And one last toy, well, it's not really a toy, limiter conduit. Limiter conduits are quite important, otherwise you're going to run into a common problem. Suppose, if I just manufacture this scenario, suppose I'm trying to make something with 2 ingredients. This happens quite a lot. Like, oh, what's a good example of this? Sure, you're making aqua regia, which has 2 ingredients, azotic acid and muriatic acid. We don't really care about temperature for this at all. We just want 2 ingredients in here, and we get aqua regia out. Well, well, let's do the obvious thing. Let's say we've got our source of muriatic acid over here and our source of azotic acid over here. I don't know, we've got machines making them somewhere, okay? And I immediately forgot which one I said was which, but let's assume it was this is the azotic acid, and that's going to all go in. So lots of azotic acids going in. Get a hopper. It's faster. And there's just lots and lots of azotic acid. This is an automated source, right? There's a machine making tons and tons of it. Tons and tons of this. And, uh-oh, the reaction vessel filled up. It's completely full of azotic acid. That's a problem, because now, if we try to put muriatic acid in, it won't fit. It's full. We can't put it in and think the thing's already full. That's a problem. If we take some azotic acid in, then suddenly there's some room for the muriatic to get in, and it fixes the problem. But really, we want to make it so that it can't overfill with one of them. And that's what the limiter conduit's for. Take a limiter conduit, and we're going to need our wrench back, and we shift right-click to change the setting. So let's say 8 on each of these. Now, it's only allowed to put up to 8 of each ingredient in here. So no matter how much azotic acid there is, it'll stop inputting into the vessel once there's 8 in the vessel. That way, we prevent ourselves from overfilling it. Same thing with the muriatic acid, although we ran out over here. We used it all. And now there's no way that we're going to risk overfilling our thing. So it's just good to have these attached. Now, technically you can connect these to a conduit, Like, you could do this. But this is not useful. The reason this is not useful is that, sure, it'll stop when, let's say, there's 2 in this conduit, but this conduit just immediately dumps everything into the vessel. So really, this is completely useless. You really want to attach it directly to the vessel. Okay. This reaction is also a good example of where you might want to use temperature changes to separate things. Because we've got 2 inputs and 1 output. And ideally, we want to get the azotic acid out. It's not azotic acid, sorry. The aqua regia out without like taking out our azotic and muriatic acid, right? Because there's a whole mix of stuff in here, and we only want the aqua regia to come out. Well, if we attach a conduit to the side, everything's going to come out. Just absolutely everything. We're going to drain our entire thing. See, there's just a mixture of stuff in here. That's no good. It's kind of a waste. So how do we separate it? Well, again, we're going to use phase changes and the fact that gases go up and everything else goes down. So this reaction, for example, we saw, could happen at literally any temperature. Okay, that makes things pretty easy. Is there a temperature where regia is going to go one way and the other 2 are going to go the other? You're going to boil at 200 C. What about your ingredients? Are either of you boiling? You're boiling at 80. And you're boiling at 90. I know what to do. If we're at, say, any temperature between 900 degrees and 200, that's the boiling point of our muriatic of our inputs versus our output. That means that all of our inputs could come out the top and the side, but our output could only come out the bottom because our aqua regia is still a liquid. So what we really want to do is we want our output to come out the bottom, and we want to heat this thing to, let's say, 100 degrees C. 100 degrees C would work. And that way, we'd only get aqua regia out the bottom. Now, that's quite a good solution. It might be that there's no magic temperature where you can do that. It might be, depending on the reaction, there might not be a single temperature where only your output will come out a certain side and the reaction can happen. Because a lot of reactions only work at certain temperatures. Like this one, for example, only works in this temperature range. If there's no single temperature, there's a few things you could do. You could set up a system to change the temperature over time in the vessel and have a whole control scheme. Or you could try and take everything out and then filter everything that comes out using various phase changes and this sort of setup, and then put the inputs back in, and the output goes to the output place. There's various ways to do it. 2 things which I very nearly forgot, which I'm just going to quickly do. If we get there's a thing called a resonating filter, which is a very, very expensive block. It requires some very late alchemy stuff like stasisol and so on. So you really don't want to have to use these if you don't have to, which is just a sort of universal filter. It has a UI with a single slot. And if I had, let's say, a mix of a whole bunch of things, let's say, for example, let me just do something. Let me just make a quick little example setup over here. Is if we were to have a bunch of, let's say, vessels, we set a filter by going in the UI and just putting like a file or a flask in there, and anything that's in this bottle, the will match the filter. So there could be multiple things in this bottle. I've set this one to only do cinnabar, aka redstone. And now, if we wrench this, if we put redstone in, redstone will come out the front, and anything else will go out the bottom. So these are just a universal filter. They are very expensive. There are you'll almost always want to do something with temperature manipulation, like this, because it's just so much cheaper. One of the few cases where you actually need to use the filter is things like if you have a mixture of aether and phlogiston, because they're both always gases. This is pretty much the only way to separate them in an automatic manner. Other than that, they're kind of normal. Okay, the other thing is that you can actually connect conduits to glassware in a stand. It's not hugely useful. It just is a thing you can do, and therefore I should mention it. If I have, for example, a flask in a stand, you can connect a conduit to the top, not any other side. And you can very simply just connect things in and out this way. This isn't the most useful thing in the world. There are a couple cases where it's just nice to be able to automatically dump out of a in or out like this. Now, hold on. I am using glass there. I can't use crystal conduits with glass bottles. That's the thing. Remember, you don't really want to mix glass and crystal if you don't have to. So I'm just using a glass conduit to pull out of a glass bottle. There we go. And we can pull things out. If we were trying to pull out, let's say, we can also pour in this way. Although in this case, this is a gas, so it won't want to. We could use a pump to force it. Let's just do that. And similarly, because you can't, if you needed to pull something out of this, let's say get redstone out, because this is a solid, it's not going to want to come out the top. We can force it to come out of the top. If you give this thing a redstone signal, let me just show this. The gas comes out fine. If you give the stand itself a redstone signal, it will act like a pump and force anything that's in it out. And again, we can still pipe stuff back in. All right then.